I'm Susan Clare. I'm the director of Together Yes. We used to sponsor the sustainability series alone, and I discover I have a distinct list, don't I? However, this year, we are very pleased to join with Progress Norwood and the library in a presentation of the sustainability series. That's once a month during the academic year. If you aren't sure what our other presentations will be for the rest of the spring, you'll find flyers in the library near the circulation desk. Help yourself to one, and it will show you what's coming up each month, and you'll probably find things that will interest you. Thank you all for coming out tonight, and I'd like to introduce Kate Sivingdon from Progress Norwood so that you can get to know her as well. And then we'll move on with the panel.
Thank you, and thank you all for coming out on this really chilly evening. I just will make this quick. Thank you for being here. Obviously, this topic is important to everyone. We see housing as a sustainability issue, both in terms of environment, but also in terms of social issues. And we have sort of threaded that and other similar ideas throughout this series. So if you want to know more about Progress Norwood, you can find us on Facebook. We're transitioning websites right now, but there's lots of ways to get involved. You can meet one of us. Raise your hand if you're with Progress Norwood. There's several of us here. You can ask us questions if you have any other questions. But let's get to the reason we all came. Matt Lane, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. My name is Matt Lane. I'm a member of Progress Norwood. I also work in affordable housing as part of my day job. I think that this is a really important issue. I know it's a hot topic. I know it's a sensitive issue. I think that the presentation is positive, and really what we're doing here is kind of getting behind the idea that affordable housing is really important to a vibrant community. And I'll get moving because I know we started a little late. So, how this started, Susan, you touched upon it. Where'd you go? Okay, this is for you. This next slide is for you. When we started talking about how I could be helpful with the series, Susan said, well, you know stuff about housing. You do housing. And I kind of asked her, well, how does that relate to sustainability? And I cribbed from your answer because I thought your answer was great. There's 3 pieces to it. But Susan said, all members of a community must be housed acceptably. It's important that not only those who can afford to buy a house find suitable housing, but everyone. And I think that pretty succinctly puts the issue at hand, why we're talking about it. You also said it keeps minorities, young people, and older people in our community, making it more diverse and a richer in experience and outlook, and that's perfect too. Mm-hmm. And that it's an issue for those who worry about development and how buildings are built and what are the practices they're using and what's that doing for our green space. So that's a really important issue too. So I appreciate it, Susan. We have 3 very good presenters, excellent presenters. We've got Veronica Truell, Shelley Gehring, and Sarah Bouchard, who have volunteered their time to talk a little bit about how they see affordable housing in the worlds that they work in. And a majority of the presentation will be from these very intelligent, awesome people. So this is the first slide I had. If you Google why affordable housing, I was going to write matters, this is what comes up. This is really what comes up. So I think it just drives home the fact that people have a lot of strong feelings about affordable housing. Affordable housing is bad. I was a little sad that that was the first thing that came up. But then you come back and you say, why is affordable housing, it's important, which it is. And then other things, it is hard to build. It doesn't work, not sure. And why it matters, which is great. But I think that really I'm just saying that I understand that people have very strong feelings about housing, but this presentation is through the lens of it being important to our community and the future of our community and creating as much opportunity for people as we can. I think I just shut off. That's it. I don't know. That's not the end of this. I just not technically sound. I was going to ask you to whistle. Okay, a couple quick slides. I did it again. Oh my God, I don't know how to operate this thing. Yeah, there we go. Okay. Appreciate it.
Sorry, get that.
Okay, is that button? Great. So, in looking for a pretty good definition of affordable housing, actually, I think these two come from Habitat for Humanity. And not necessarily that they're the experts in affordable housing, but the way that they defined it seems like a pretty good way to convey its importance. So, adults living in housing that they struggle to afford often describe themselves as less healthy, and the well-being and development of children is compromised by living in insecure housing. We'll talk a little bit more about what insecure housing means in a bit, but it's not hard to think that if you're worrying about paying your rent, there are probably a lot of other things you're worried about. That's the gist of it. And then also that when people live in affordable housing, they are able to do more. They're able to have better opportunities and increase self-confidence and increase self-reliance. Those things lead to a better community. Again, if you're faced with, do I pay the rent or do I pay for transportation? Do I pay for food? Those are real issues. Families paying too high a percentage of their income for housing often find themselves making impossible choices. That's the reality. And this is a term that I think will probably come up in a few of the presentations, cost burden, and some of you may have heard it before. So really what that means is households spending more than 30% of their income on housing are considered cost burdened, while those spending more than 50% are severely cost burdened. We have some slides later that show that there are a lot of cost burdened people that live in our community. What can we do to improve that situation? That's what we're talking about. Really, the sort of defining affordable, I think this was from maybe Concord's website. Some town websites have pretty good housing definitions, glossaries. This was theirs that I liked. It's housing targeted to and affordable by households that meet specific income eligibility levels. Typically, households earning below 80% of the AMI, the area median income. That's just kind of a boilerplate definition. There's probably some variations of that, but generally, when you say affordable housing, that's what the technical terminology is. And I hear this a lot too. You say, oh, this is an affordable housing development. Well, it actually doesn't refer to the design or the way it was built or the materials or I think that a good way to think about what's affordable is what is the cost to the person living in that unit. And again, housing is considered affordable if the household pays less than 30% of its monthly income to secure the housing. Is Norwood affordable? Okay, so this came from the previous housing production plan from 2013. Obviously, the census is happening in 2020, so we'll have new numbers. There are some ways to sort of project numbers, but this was just taken straight from the housing production plan, which we'll talk about in a little bit, what a housing production plan is. This is from 2013. It says, between 2000 and 2010, so the previous decade, Norwood's median income increased 26%, while home sales increased 44%. So it's pretty easy to see that when that happens, housing costs go this way, and income goes this way. We need to work to try to make those align a little bit better. And this is also from the housing production plan from 2013, that 2 of every 5 households in Norwood have incomes that may be considered low to moderate income. So again, that's a lot of people. So Shelley, I stole this slide from your website, not knowing that you had included it in yours. So I'll skip over it quickly, because this is kind of like driving. This is...
Covering it twice.
No, it's okay. But I will let you explain it better since it's your organization. But this really drives home the gap between affordability, between renters and owners. Just very quickly, those terminologies that we talked about earlier, cost burden, severely cost burden. If you look at the top, that's all your renters in Norwood, and almost 50% are cost burdened, and almost 25% are severely cost burdened. Whereas the bottom graph, those are your homeowners, and you can see the percentage is a lot lower. You'll be able to articulate that much better than I just did. This comes from the National Low Income Coalition's website. It's specific to Massachusetts. I know it's a lot of information up there. And again, we'll make this slideshow available on the website so you can refer to it again. But it just shows that I really like the middle bar graph here, affordable and available homes per 100 renter households. So this is for people specifically earning less than 30% of the area median income. They're considered extremely low income. So now we're talking less than 80%, less than 50%, less than 30%. And as you can see from the middle graph, at 30%, there's not a lot of available opportunities for housing for people the less income that you bring in. And that's really sort of the gist of it. Part of the housing production plan from 2013 cited this as a need that Norwood needs to figure out how to build or provide more units for people earning less than 30% of the area median income. Great. I included this really quickly. This is actually a flyer for the new lofts that are the Plimpton Press, over on Regal Press, over on Guild Street. So there's 40 units, 10 of them are quote unquote affordable. So if you look real quick, I know it didn't turn out so well when I cut and pasted. So this is an application for the affordable units there. So a 1-bedroom is affordable $1,625 a month. That doesn't include utilities. That's expensive. And there's only 10 of them. Well, there's 9 of those, and there's a studio that's a little bit less. Again, I think that the development of units is great, but I think that that's not affordable for a lot of people. And then just very quickly, I should have taken out that bullet. We're just going to touch really quickly on the Norwood Housing Authority. Actually, Bill Plasko is here from the Norwood Housing Authority. I appreciate it, Bill. Oh, and Steve Merritt, I'm sorry. Steve. We don't have a representative speaking from the Norwood Housing Authority because I don't think that it's fair to put anyone on the spot. I think we're just going to talk about affordable housing in general and sort of what other communities are doing, how they're improving their stock. Didn't want to put anyone on the spot, but this is the Norwood Housing Authority. This is a brief overview of what they do and the units that they own and manage. 406 one-bedroom apartments and a family development of 75 apartments, 2 and 3 bedrooms. And then one of the things I meant to do was try and get an updated waiting list because it's big, and that's just the nature of it. You know, if we can work together to try to create new units of housing dedicated to seniors, that would be great. I don't know how to do it. I mean, I think that that's our job as a community is to figure that out. And just very quickly before I eat up any more time, this is a current list of all the subsidized housing inventory units in Norwood. As you can see, the top 5 there are the Norwood Housing Authority units, and then below that are different developments. And the bottom 3 there, the bottom 2 are the newer units at Regal Lofts and Avalon. And I think the interesting thing about this is that some of the units are restricted or deemed affordable in perpetuity. Some of them aren't. And I think that that's something that we have to plan for the future. It's when these units are no longer affordable, what's going to happen? I don't know, but we can start to talk about it. Okay, that's my piece. Sorry for talking so much. Okay, Veronica, it's probably easier if you just come up here. And this is Veronica Terrell. She's from the NeighborWorks Housing Solutions.
Thank you. Good evening. Can you all hear me? Yes. All right. And if you can't, just, wave your hand and I will speak a little bit louder. So I am from NeighborWorks Housing Solutions and I'm the 40B portfolio manager. That's my day job. The other thing that I do here in the wonderful town of Norwood, which I'm so happy to be a part of, is I'm the newest pastor at First Baptist Church Norwood. So you guys might see me tootling around, so I just want to let you know. If you see me, that's why you're seeing me. I'm in Norwood, and I'm loving it. And so my family and I are really excited about being part of Norwood. But one of the things that's really important to me as well is housing. I've been part of housing and home ownership for a long time, at least 17 years. That means I went from being a loan officer to an underwriter to the nonprofit world, which I love so much. So if there are any bankers in the room, don't be offended. I just love nonprofit life. And so we are doing some great things around affordable home ownership. And so I want to just not give you a lot of the technical pieces because you're going to hear so much of it, but I want to just share a couple of stories around affordable housing and why I know, not just because it's mandated, but why I know it's really important to every community. I've had a few families come through my agency. Some of them started off in Section 8. You know, they had vouchers, worked really hard, made sure that they kept their jobs, fixed their credit, made sure they did saving. And sometimes when you're in subsidized housing, you can't save but so much money, but they still did everything they could to save. They decided to become part of what we call family self-sufficiency. And then I would get the phone call that they were ready for home ownership. And the coolest thing to me is watching a family who worked really hard to get to their dream of home ownership, something that a lot of us just get because we've worked, we've done the things we needed to do. But for some people, it's really just a dream. And they feel like they may never get there. But I've worked with families who thought they would never make it. And I got to tell you, we just closed on a house in Dighton, and the mom and I worked together. She did everything right. Again, lenders in the room, don't be upset. Some paperwork went awry with the bank. They were almost homeless because the landlord wanted them to move because they'd already given notice, right? The landlord was like, you have to move, and so they were faced with sleeping on the floor for a couple of weeks. Kids had already been displaced out of the school system, and so these things were happening. But what we did is we worked really closely together, and I did everything I could to not only work with the lender and the attorneys, but I worked with her to make sure that she got into the home that she wanted. This was the second home because the first home she applied for, she didn't get because something else happened. It wasn't her fault. But we worked hard, and she called me yesterday in tears and just said, I am so happy. You can't imagine how happy my children are. They're outside playing. We've met new neighbors. I already know about Halloween for next year, and I was laughing. I said, it's next year. But she said, we already know it. We're going to get like 400 pieces of candy. I'm like, okay, that's just great. School system and everything. But listening to her, and you could hear the tears of joy. She switched her work schedule around just so she could be home during the day, but she's just one family. 40B is really important because her salary isn't high, but she did everything she could right to make sure that she gave the dream of home ownership and housing in a good community and a great school to her kids. I had another family where parents were both working. There was an accident. Mom couldn't work anymore. So the dad was holding down 2 jobs. They were in an apartment that was needed some work. Landlord wasn't doing it. Landlords in the room, don't be offended, I'm just sharing. But there was a need for them to move forward, and they came to the home buyer workshop that I was teaching, and then they heard about 40B, and they had never heard about it before, so I explained it. And I said, you know, but this is where you have to be in terms of your income, and you still have to have good credit. And they came to me the next day and said, we really want to try. They tried with him working 2 jobs, and she's not ever going to be able to work again. They had 2 sons, and both sons are on the spectrum. So for those who understand that, they're both on the spectrum. And what was really cool is when they went to see the house, the 2 little boys said, this is going to be my room. And the other one said, this will be my room. And then they told me all the things they were going to do. When we closed on that house, I went the week after. And the boys were like grabbing me saying, you've got to see our rooms. One of them had it all decked out in all Army gear, which I thought was really cool. And the mom is in tears, and the dad is overjoyed. And then the other one, his whole room was like Nintendo. It was like all sorts of things happening, computers going and all that. But I say this to say that you just never know. 40B housing is awesome, and it helps another family. The family just worked really hard. Their life was just a little different. Their salaries may not be the same as ours, but they still needed this opportunity to stabilize their family, you know, have their kids live well, grow up in a great community, have really cool friends. You know, you could walk down the street to your neighbor's house and not worry, and I love those stories And there's so many of them. I am blessed to see people finding home ownership, not just in the regular way, but through affordable housing. And so I would say, for those of you who have questions about it, it doesn't mean that somebody is just low income or it's not Section 8. It isn't. It just means that somebody had lower income, but they were still able to buy a house because they still did everything that you and I would do to get into that house. And so that's one of the things, if nothing else, if you all don't remember anything else, just remember that if you see a 40B house or you see a developer in a meeting saying, hey, I want to build some affordable housing, just remember that there might be a family, just like the ones I described, who really need to be in a really great place in a great community right next to you, right down the street from you. And this is an opportunity for all of us to make sure that there is more affordable housing in this community, right? I would say amen, but we're not church. So, oh, the clerk would be great because I don't have my mouse. Awesome. So again, there is a lot of content and you will hear from so many people, but what is 40B? So a comprehensive permit, it is a law enacted in 1969. And so you will, like I said, you hear a lot more about that, but it's really about the stories of the people that would come from being a part of this program. So many people can take advantage of this. Some of the statistics are a tad bit older, but I wanted to get to the goal, right? So the goal of 40B is to allow working families and seniors to remain in their communities where they might be otherwise priced out. So we were talking about the average purchase price. So I kind of looked it up really quickly, and it seems like the average purchase price here is around $500,000. Everyone's shaking their head, yes. So 500,000, 525, I think I saw 414 on the low end, $1 million on the high end. So it's really hard to just kind of move into nowhere than a lot of towns around us, right? But it was designed to permit the development of multifamily and affordable housing to just build in these parts, you know. So, and then it's qualifying for 40B. So it's the same as you and I. We still have to do all the, deal with your credit, your budgeting. The bank still has to approve you. And I will say this about 40B. There are times when people try to go around the protocols and the processes that we have in place. There's always going to be that. But for those of us who are really monitoring, which is what I do, and I do a lot of compliance, when we're really looking at the package, we make sure that the family is an affordable family so that not a second income pops up on the day you close. You know, we make sure that the families really do follow the guidelines and fit the program. And so understanding that income and assets may not be at $75,000. As a matter of fact, we don't want you to have more than $75,000. I'd like to have $75,000. But, and being a first-time home buyer, sometimes there are exceptions. You also have to agree to the deed restriction. So here's the thing. When people hear deed restriction, they do get concerned because they think, oh, it's like Section 8 and you can't do anything with the house. No, it just means that you can't make a 10 by 10 deck when there's only supposed to be an 8 by 10 deck. Something like that. I mean, not 8 by 10, but a bigger deck to a smaller deck. You can't put in marble when it calls for linoleum or tile. So there are different things that can't happen when it's deed restricted. You cannot just refinance. We did have a client who refinanced. He did not follow the guidelines. I had just become the monitor, so it was newer for me. But my predecessor and I were talking about this. The guy went ahead and refinanced the house. He bought it for $97,000 back when, and refinanced it up to $300,000+. He skipped all of the guidelines. Everybody did. So I had a lot of work to do to pull it back so I could give it to a family that deserved to be in that home as a first-time home buyer. So the deed restriction is important, but if you're a market person, you're not going to want to buy it because you can't sell it for higher than what the value is supposed to be for deed restricted property. And people often get that confused. Income limits, I did give you all income limits, and here's where you can find them. If you just want to look it up yourself at any given time, there's a way to go in and look at it. But if you're in Norwood, one person, 62, two people in a household, 71.4, 3, 80,300, 4, 89.2, and 5, 96.3, and it goes on, 96,350. And so what we see when you're purchasing a house, you cannot make more than 62,450. But imagine the person.
Is it gross?
Gross. Yep, it is gross. So, and HUD sets the guidelines. And so we just adhere to them, and we just make sure that whoever's moving into the house, like I had a family say, well, we're gonna add a cousin. Well, the cousin worked. You can't add the cousin, because the cousin put them way over. They put them at like 90 some odd thousand, and they're like, why? And I'm like, because now you have to just buy a market rate house. So these are the things that we have to think about, and there are some advantages and disadvantages. So I'm gonna ask you guys a question. What do you think the advantages are of buying a 40B home? Anybody? Not all at once. Go ahead.
Stability. Stability,
Anybody else? Stability for the family or community?
the family and the community.
Anyone else want to answer? That's the main piece, is stability for the family and the community, right? You never know who moves in and how they can contribute to your community. So are there any disadvantages? Not really, if you know that you're stabilizing.
Well, it depends on the circumstances, right? If somebody was just selling drugs or something, like doing something nefarious, and they were just living for free, that wouldn't be good. And then you'd have that popping up in all sorts of nice communities that otherwise wouldn't have that because they would be able to afford it. But that's not what's happening right now, anyways.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if somebody, so he's, I don't know if you heard him, so if people are getting their money in ways that are not the norm, that would not be great for the community, and we know that, which is why it's great to have somebody monitoring the process. Because for those of us who monitor, we are looking at every single piece of paper. We're looking at your bank statements too to see if you have extra money coming in. Because we want to make sure that that affordable house goes to an affordable family.
Now, once a family has been approved and has bought this affordable house,
Can you use your camp voice, your outside voice?
once someone has bought an affordable house with this program, say a single mom with a couple of kids, what if she gets married and that man has an income? Is she suddenly ineligible to remain in her own house? Or does she really own it for the rest of her life?
Great question. So for those of you, did everyone hear? Okay, great. Great question. And so she buys a house, she gets married, or he buys a house, gets married. No, they can remain in the house because she's already bought the house. She already had the house. She gets married, that's just, it is what it is. We don't go back.
It's an increase in income.
It's an increase in income, but the agencies don't go back and say, okay, now you have to move. It's different than with affordable in terms of Section 8, and so whoever's going to be talking about the rentals,
Okay.
that is different, because what I do know, and I don't work in that part of my agency, but I do know that if incomes change in a Section 8 situation, they can go back and give you a timeline on why would you have to either move or upgrade. But in a purchase situation, you own that house. And so that is your house. And so if your income goes up, great for you. It is what it is. Okay. Anybody else?
When did the 40B thing come out? When did the 40B thing?
1969.
1969, okay.
Mm-hmm.
So, now, is there, you mentioned the income is one variable which is, that would go into somebody being able to be eligible for the 40B thing. Is there anything else? Like, is there a certain number of them or something like that?
So it's always going to be income, your credit. So you have to get approved by a mortgage company in order to buy a 40B, but we still look at your W-2s, your pay stubs, your bank statements.
So the government's basically augmenting your mortgage. They're putting money towards your mortgage.
No. So you have to go and get, so it's different than Section 8. So Section 8 is one aspect, and so this isn't
Section 8,
that.
you're renting.
Is renting, right? So
Yeah.
people get affordable, so affordable housing and affordable home ownership are two different things, right? So affordable housing is your rental piece, so we call it subsidized housing also. But when you're talking about affordable 40B home ownership, you get a mortgage to pay, you pay that mortgage for that house. The government doesn't have anything to do with that in particular. There is a caveat to that.
The government's subsidizing your payments, I mean, right?
No, not in that aspect. You're just getting a mortgage for the house, just like anything else. It's just like, it's a first-time home buyer,
So
and,
where's the money coming from?
well, let me give you the other side. Section 8 to home ownership, there is a program called Section 8 to home ownership, where the government does pay a portion of your mortgage. But in this respect, you're
Yeah,
just buying this house flat out. You're buying
I
it
think what he's
insured.
asking is,
Mhm.
in a chapter 40B development where only a portion are affordable, it's the market rate units that are subsidizing the affordable units. So it's the developer that's doing it. It's not coming from the government.
it's developer.
It's the developer. It's the market rate units that are subsidizing the affordable units that are being sold.
Mhm.
So in a traditional 40B, there is no public subsidy. It's the market rate units that are subsidizing,
So
that
the
are making
properties
the
are zoned
choice.
as 40Bs?
What's that?
The properties are zoned as 40Bs from the
Well, that's a whole, we're not gonna get into that. We're not gonna get into that
It's
technical
a,
today.
that's why I
I
wanted
think
to
too,
kind
just in the
of,
interest of time.
Yeah. I'm gonna do one more person.
Yeah, let's move on.
Okay.
Where are they? Yeah, so I think you gave that earlier on.
Yeah, and
So,
we'll circle back to
and
that.
they'll circle back
I
to
think in
that.
the interest of time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to
Right.
present. You know, we want to not be here later than 8, and I know it's a very sensitive issue, I know it's a hot topic.
But it's a good, it's,
I'm just asking where the money's coming from.
Yeah, no,
yeah,
it's
we
fine.
can get
Yeah.
back to you
It's
on
a
that
good
too.
question,
So
but
we'll try to
we've spent
dedicate
some
maybe the
time
last
on it,
15
so we
minutes
need
if
to
people
answer
have
a few
specific
others.
questions like that we can get into. But I appreciate it.
And in order to, and so for those of you who are writing and taking notes, you will get this. And so here are some of the websites where you can find some of the affordable properties. But my biggest thing is just to share the story. To share the story that there are people who would love to own a home and there are places where they can't. And so we need towns to, join in and create more affordable housing so we can have really great new families coming in to be part of who we are here in Norwood. And I say we because I love Norwood.
Thank you so much. So next, Shelley Gearing from Mass Housing Partnership is going to present. And without further ado.
Good evening. So my name is Shelley Gearing, and I am I work at MHP, Mass Housing Partnership. And tonight I'm going to actually focus in more on affordable housing trusts as a tool that many communities in Massachusetts are using to help move affordable housing forward locally. So many of our communities, like Norwood, have the Community Preservation Act, or CPA. And that entity does need to be funding at least 10%, but at least 10% of the funds towards affordable housing. But the CPC, or Community Preservation Committee, also has to focus on open space and recreation and historic preservation. Affordable housing is pretty complex, so many communities find that having an entity like an affordable housing trust focused just on housing is important. We are a quasi-state agency in Massachusetts. We are privately funded, also organized as a nonprofit. We have 4 legs to our stool. So we are funded actually through our lending. We've lent over $1 billion to help support the creation of over 22,000 units of housing. We have the One Mortgage product, which is the most affordable mortgage product in the state for households earning up to 100% of the area at median income. My colleague Isabel is here from our home ownership team. Higher, raise a hand higher. In case you have questions later, she can answer. And I have a few of our flyers that talk about, that talk about this mortgage product. Sorry. Community Assistance is the team that I'm on, and we have a Center for Housing Data. So we have a few folks on staff that are collecting and analyzing data and getting that data out to help facilitate more effective policy on the local level as well as the state level around housing. So Community Assistance, my team, we're a team of 5 people right now, and our goal is to help build leadership to support affordable housing across the state. We work with municipalities, with nonprofit organizations, as well as housing authorities. And we do this in a variety of ways. We have a lot of different trainings, a 2-day Housing Institute in June in Devens. We have Chapter 40B trainings, fair housing. We do a lot of technical assistance. So if Norwood has municipal lots that you're interested in seeing affordable housing on, we can help with the initial feasibility and pre-development work. We help with zoning issues. We also work with housing authorities that have surplus land and are interested in having affordable housing built on that land. And then my work focuses a lot on housing trusts and working with communities who want to create a housing trust or that already have a housing trust. We help to build the technical experience on the committees and support with resources as well. So tonight I'm going to talk about what a municipal affordable housing trust is, talk a little bit about operations and some best practices, the things that we're noticing and suggesting for communities, and then the kinds of activities that your housing trust, similar to your CPC, can be participating in. So the Municipal Affordable Housing Trust Statute, it's organized under Chapter 44, Section 55C in the Massachusetts General Law. It was passed in 2006, and a big impetus was as more communities were passing the Community Preservation Act and having these resources available, more communities were wanting an entity that some of the resources could be put in that could focus more intentionally on affordable housing. So this is a map of the state, and I know it's impossible to read, but the color communities are those that have passed CPA, and then the lines are trust communities. And what we see in our data is that about 80% of the communities that have an affordable housing trust also have the Community Preservation Act. So there is a connection between those two entities. So a housing trust is a public entity. It's created locally by your legislative board. It's a 50% majority vote. The purpose is to create and preserve affordable housing, and it's led by a local board of trustees that's appointed locally. Because it's a municipal entity, then just like all of your other boards, it's subject to public procurement, designer selection, conflict of interest, and public meeting laws. The purpose in the statute is to provide for the creation and preservation of affordable housing in municipalities for the benefit of low and moderate income households. So it's a pretty limited scope, and it's focused just on low and moderate income. It's not market rate, it's not mixed income or mixed use, it's low and moderate income only. Over time, as some CPCs were transferring money to their housing trusts, there were communities that were noticing some discrepancies between these two statutes that were causing some issues with town councils. Specifically under CPA, if you're familiar with kind of the verbs and how CPA funds can be spent, there's the category support, the verb support, and that's in CPA, but it wasn't in the trust statute, and some communities were concerned that they were wanting to spend CPA for things that were not allowed with the trust statute. So a few years ago, some changes were made to the trust statute, so now all of the allowable activities for community housing under CPA are allowable for housing trusts. So now they are compatible. We've also clarified that all of the rules and restrictions of CPA follow any CPA funds to the housing trust, and that the trust needs to be tracking how they're spending CPA funds so they can report back to your local CPC committee so that that can be reported to the state. And then there was just a technical change that trusts can engage in grant agreements. So I bring this up because you are a CPA community, and if you decide to move forward with the housing trust, then these are some of the things that you'll want to be familiar with. So a housing trust more broadly can address your affordable housing needs. It is a municipal entity, so it shouldn't be operating in a silo. It should really be focusing on implementing the goals, the housing goals of the community. So they can support local control of housing, engage in real estate activities, so the trust can buy and sell property. And because once the trust has funds in its account, then the trust doesn't need to go to town meeting. It means that the trust can work more nimbly in the real estate market, which is one of the key advantages of a housing trust. And then the trust can be collecting funds from a variety of sources, including donations. The statute specifies that there need to be a minimum of five board members. So an important thing to keep in mind when we're thinking about creating one in our community is, does the community have the capacity to fill at least 5 seats on another board. So in some of our communities, that's a challenge, and you want to make sure that there are people who can show up, who are going to participate. You can get a quorum, so it's going to be a working board. I have some communities where their appointees to the trust are on multiple boards and they just can't get a quorum for the trust. So it's something to keep in mind when you create another board in your community. The statute specifies that 1 member of the select board must be on the trust. These members are appointed by the select board, and so it's not off on its own. It's town folks, and they're appointed by the select board, and someone on the select board sits on the board, so it's connected to your other boards. There's 2-year terms, and then the statute specifies that members of the trust are public agents for under municipal law purposes, similar to your other boards. The statute goes through a variety of different powers that are allowed. Yes,
I'm just
question.
gathering Norwood doesn't have one, doesn't have a...
You do not have a trust yet, no. Yeah, sorry, I guess I thought that was obvious, sorry. The statute allows a variety of powers. And some communities accept the statute as it's written, exactly as it's written. Others might modify certain things. They might require 2/3 vote of the trustees to accept or receive real property. It just depends on the community about how they want to create a trust. And then some keys to success, what we're seeing as we work in more communities around the state, it's not rocket science, but it really is important to have some money, to have a vision of what the purpose is of the trust, to have leadership that can help move projects forward, and then to have transparency in the community. So these are a variety of different ways that communities in Massachusetts are raising money for their affordable housing trust. CPA, the Community Preservation Act, is a significant resource for many communities, but not all. Inclusionary zoning, many communities have an inclusionary zoning bylaw, and there may be an in lieu of payment option that some developers are allowed to use. In some communities, it's written in the bylaw that those in lieu of payments will go to the Affordable Housing Trust. We have a community on the Cape that has a cell phone tower, and the lease payments are directed to their housing trust. Some communities have transferred free cash, like Truro. We have our first tax override in Orleans. They actually passed a permanent $275,000 tax override that goes to their Affordable Housing Trust every year. Municipal bond, we have Medfield as the first community that has bonded. They bonded $1 million to seed their Affordable Housing Trust. They don't have CPA, so they didn't bond it against CPA, they bonded against their operating budget. There may be developer negotiated fees or ordinance payments, and then some communities are starting to talk about short-term rental fees, the Airbnb, if there can be some of that tax funds that can go to housing, real estate transfer fees, some communities are working on that, marijuana tax. So communities are trying to be creative about how they can raise more money to support affordable housing. So when you create it, then you set up an account. It's typical to have just a municipal account through the municipal treasurer. At the end of the fiscal year, all the funds that are in the account remain in the account. It does not revert back to the general fund. It stays in the trust fund. And then we're urging communities to start from the beginning to track where your funds are coming from, because different funds may have different restrictions, and we just want to make sure that we're spending the funds appropriately. And then we're also encouraging communities to be open and thoughtful about how you want to spend money that you have, to make the case to the community and to create a budget to determine how much money you need for different uses. On the bottom left, this just shows you that in some of our communities, CPA funds are transferred to the trust, and in some cases, a lot of the CPA funds are transferred to the trust. So Cambridge every year transfers 80% of their CPA funds to their housing trust, so almost all of their money goes towards affordable housing every single year. In Somerville, 45% of their CPA funds are transferred to their housing trust, and Grafton is a town that has been transferring about 10% every year, so the minimum amount that needs to go towards housing. And then we encourage trusts to be thoughtful, the members of the trust to be thoughtful about determining the needs in the community. So in Norwood, you do have a housing production plan that expired in 2018. So your data around what are the needs in the community is old. So we would suggest that if you did move forward with a trust, I'm not sure if you're updating your housing production plan yet, but that the trusts start with by updating your housing needs analysis or your housing production plan, so that they can be thinking about what their role is based on current data of what the needs are in the community. And then that can help the trustees set some priorities, because our housing needs are huge and it can be overwhelming. So we suggest that boards focus in on a few things that are reachable, instead of thinking we're going to do the 10 things that are really necessary, but to narrow it a little bit because it is a volunteer board. And then some communities have benchmarks. So Somerville is a community where their trust has determined that they want to spend a portion of their housing trust funds on households earning less than 50% of the area at median income. So they've set that as a benchmark for their team, but also it's a cue to the community and to different organizations that this is a board that wants to support the lowest income people in the community, not just at 80% or higher. You don't have to do that, but that's something that a board could do. And then we suggest a mission statement. So a sentence or two that the trust comes up with to be able to help guide the trust, but also to tell the community how the trust sees its role in the community. And then to create some sort of plans to help the trust move forward. And that can be really informal. Like on the left, this is Beverly. They created a trust. They had a consultant to update their housing plan. But then internally, they created some guidelines and the eligible activities. So based on the data that they have, the needs in the community, they determined what kind of activities they wanted to fund as a housing trust. And then they put it in a packet for developers and for organizations to apply for the funds. So that was more informal. Some communities, like in Amherst, they hired a consultant and they did a more extensive strategic plan, so looking out 5 years. So it just depends on the community and what you think you need, what the trust thinks that it needs, and how much planning you've already done in your community. And then it takes teamwork. So this needs to be a board that's actually active board, not just showing up, but really doing some work. So it takes committed trustees that can show up and create a quorum, a chairperson that really knows how to move projects forward, and then the most successful trusts do have some degree of staff support. It can be more administrative to help with budgets, like agendas and minutes and communication in the town, or it can be more technical to help with programs. And then in some communities, there's a need to kind of clarify roles between different boards and perhaps different organizations. And this is just an example of Manchester created some housing strategies on the left, determined shorter and longer term goals, and then on the right, the lead boards, just for some, not only so that the boards aren't stepping on each other's toes, but also to provide some accountability for different strategies. And then we really encourage transparency, and it's always surprising to me in towns how much this can be a struggle between boards. But particularly because once a housing trust has funds in its account and therefore doesn't need to go to town meeting, it's, I think, all the more important that the trust be really open with the funds that they have and how they're spending the funds and what their goals and priorities are. So don't make it difficult for people to find that information. Report back to the pertinent boards in your community. When you do spend funds, promote what you're spending funds on, and then use a web page. So this is Westport's. They put their mission statement and the 3 primary ways they're going to meet their mission statement, their staff contact, who's a part-time person, trustees, and then a variety of links to their housing production plan, to different programs in town. So don't make it hard for people to figure out what the trust is doing. And then different trusts have different ways of operating. Some just want to fund projects. So they just want to look at applications like a foundation and then decide which ones to fund. Others want to be more assertive and they want to initiate projects. So we're seeing more affordable housing trusts in recent years be engaged in disposing of municipal land for affordable housing. So we've seen more trusts engaged in the pre-development and the feasibility work up front, helping to write the request for proposals, reviewing proposals, and moving forward with actual developments in town, whereas some just want to fund, and then some want to do a mix of both. So we suggest that the trust starting out decide how the trust in Norwood, if you decide to go there, wants to operate, and just to be clear about that. And then there are all different kinds of things that your housing trust could be engaged in. I use the CPA verbs because all the activities, like I said earlier, under CPA are allowed with a trust. And these are the CPA verbs of acquire, create, preserve, and support. So all of these examples are things that a CPA, a CPC could fund, as well as an affordable housing trust. So this is an example of acquiring affordable housing. This is a development that existed in Barnstable, 124 units. It had been, I think it was originally permitted under Chapter 40B, where maybe 25% had been affordable, but most of them had been market rate. But in 2011, a nonprofit developer was able to use $500,000 of local funds to access additional financing to buy the entire development. And now almost all the units have an affordability restriction on them.
Maybe not the best time, but as long as you've got a picture of these lovely apartments up there, how much do they rent?
How much do they?
Rent for?
So I don't actually know how much these rent for because it would be based on the median income in their area, so that's not local here, so I don't know offhand. But a few of the tenants had been not income qualified, so a few of the apartments are market rate, but most of them are affordable. And I wanted to get back to earlier, we were talking about homeownership versus rental. In rental, in affordable rental housing, regardless of how it was financed, whether it was Section 8, whether it's under Chapter 40B, whether it's a LIP development with DHCD, all rental units are income qualified, tenants are income qualified every single year. So in homeownership, it's at the time of purchase, and we don't penalize people when they've purchased a home when their income increases. In rental, it is different. There is income qualifying every single year. This is an example in Northampton. A nonprofit organization has created a variety of enhanced single-room occupancy units around town. So in this case, it was an existing house that the nonprofit was able to acquire right off Main Street, and then they redeveloped it into 10 units of enhanced single-room occupancy. And single-room occupancy, enhanced single-room occupancy, means that each unit has a kitchenette and a bathroom. So this is helping to reach the needs of extremely low-income people in the community. And these are people who are largely part of our workforce. And then we have several affordable housing trusts that have created small-scale homeownership programs. And I'm just going to go through a few because there's so many different ways to develop these models, but it might be something that's interesting in Norwood. So in Sudbury, what they do is they create a lottery to see who is interested and qualified to purchase a home under this program. It's for households earning up to 80% of the area median income. Then they have a staff person and a board. They identify homes that are coming on the market that are more modest, like a Cape or a ranch style house. They negotiate a sale price with the seller, and then at the time of sale, the trust puts in the difference between the negotiated sale price and what makes the house affordable to a household earning 80% of the area median income. So it's been about $225,000 or more. It's just because the housing market gets tighter and tighter. So this is a way that they've been able to preserve some of the more naturally affordable housing in the community, and then spread out home ownership around the community as well. Sudbury's a town where they have a lot of tear down issues, so where smaller homes are torn down and then a much bigger house is built. So it's a way that they're trying to stabilize and maintain some of the more affordable housing. And then Norfolk is different in that Norfolk actually purchases. So they where Sudbury negotiates the sale but never holds the property, Norfolk's trust actually tries to purchase 3 of these modest Cape-sized houses in the spring, do any kind of rehab to the houses, and then sell them all in the same lottery in the fall. So they've added over 20 homes this way in Norfolk. And then Leverett's a bit different. I'm sorry. Both of these previous communities work with the state, and deed restriction is put on the units, and they're added to the subsidized housing inventory for each of those communities. In Leverett, theirs actually goes up to 100% of the area at median income because they're using CPA funds, so there isn't a restriction with the state. They're not on the subsidized housing inventory, but they have their own restrictions to make sure that they stay affordable at 100% of the area at median income. So Leverett's housing market is very different than a lot of ours over here in the east, but they will provide up to 20% or $50,000 towards the sale. Their regional housing and redevelopment authority manages it. They do it a little bit different. They have vouchers that are worth up to $50,000, and then they create a lottery, and you get, if you win one, then you have this voucher that's good for 6 months where you need to find the house that you want to purchase. So it's a little bit different model, but these are run through their trusts. And then under creating, there's many models in communities of using either private land or municipal land for affordable housing. This is Yarmouth, and Yarmouth has actually been very active in rezoning parts of Route 28 to allow for multifamily housing development. This is an example of a section of 28 that was rezoned. A developer purchased this land privately and then spent time negotiating with the community. And what they're building right now, I think it's actually completely completed, 69 units of affordable housing. These are affordable for up to 60% of the area at median income, which means that there's low-income housing tax credits in this deal. When you see 60%, that means that there's low-income housing tax credits, and then some of them are affordable at 30% of the area at median income. Their housing trust put in over $2 million, equivalent of $30,000 per unit. So the combination of Yarmouth rezoning the area for multifamily and then the significant local contribution contributed to the state funding this development in the first round of low-income housing tax credits, which is really rare. It's so competitive that usually it takes 2 or 3 rounds, which is 2 or 3 years. But because of the rezoning to allow for multifamily, the strong community support with $2 million, the state funded it right away. This is another example of multifamily housing that a trust strongly supported in Westport. This was actually municipal land. And again, you see 60% of the area median income. That means there's low-income housing tax credit in there. They did reserve 5 affordable at 100% of the area median income, which tells you that there's CPA funds in the deal. But their trust contributed up to $1 million, about $1 million into this development. So they did some of the pre-development work on the land to help them determine the feasibility of housing there. They acquired an adjacent parcel that gave access to the land, and then they contributed some towards the development so that the developer could show the state that the community was supporting it, and the state responded with low-income housing tax credits. And this is being completed now. And then this is an example of Norwell where the town decided to declare a former police station as surplus, and they actually transferred this land to the housing trust. That's pretty rare. This is the first time that I've actually seen that. Oftentimes it stays, the town in general owns it, but it's not the housing trust, and the housing trust is involved in it. This was a case where they actually transferred it to the trust. So it was the trust that issued the request for proposals, reviewed the proposals, and now this development is finishing up right now, 18 units of senior age-restricted rental housing in Norwell, and their trust and the CPC put in $1.2 million. So I think a pretty attractive building, pretty sensitive also to the design of Norwell. And then there are many examples of reusing existing buildings for affordable housing. Sometimes there's a historic component, which can actually be helpful if you can have CPA funds for 2 uses, but not always. So in Middleborough, the shoe shop place, that actually had been a shoe factory, and now a couple nonprofits have redeveloped it into 25 apartments. In the middle in North Andover, it had been a nursing home that had not been used for years. A nonprofit was able to acquire it, and using about $1 million of local funds, developed that now into 42 apartments. And then in Rockport, school, an old school that's now age-restricted senior housing. And there are many examples in Massachusetts of old schools being reused for housing. And then the preserve verb under CPA. When we think of housing, we're thinking of expiring use, which is what we refer to when deed restrictions are expiring. So Matt did bring up that sometimes deed restrictions are in perpetuity, that they will be on, quote, forever. In other cases, the deed restriction may be only 15 years or 30 years. So it is something that you want to pay attention in Norwood so that you don't lose any units off of the subsidized housing inventory. And then also preserve is protecting the housing structure. So in Bedford, this is an example of expiring use. They had this 96 units of apartments, and the restrictions were set to expire. A nonprofit organization named POA was able to use $3 million of CPA funds to purchase all the units, and now they are affordable in perpetuity. The town originally voted to bond $3 million with CPA, but as time went by before the deal was closed, they decided that they were just going to take it out of reserves that they had. A housing trust would not be able to bond the way that CPA can, because a housing trust wouldn't have the same kind of income, consistent income that CPA does. But it is something that CPA can do to help support the preservation of housing in Norwood. And then to get a little bit more technical, just because you are a CPA community too, preserve in the statute, CPA statute, is the protection of personal or real property from injury, harm, or destruction. That's not rehab. And specifically in the CPA statute, you cannot use CPA funds to rehab existing units unless those units were created or acquired with CPA funds. So this becomes important with specifically housing authority units that are existing units. DHCD, the state, has put together a memo to help clarify some of this language, and we have that electronically. We can get that to you, but I'm not going to get too much into it. I just want to give you an example of using CPA funds for a housing authority that makes, that we believe, and the state, CPC, and DHCD believe follows the statute. So in Gloucester, they had a development where they had already shut one of the units because of leaking. The roof was old. They requested from their CPC $86,000 that they used. They coupled that with money from the state to replace the roof. So it's addressing the envelope of the building so that no other units would be lost because of the leaking. So that's a great example of partnering with state funds and your local CPC funds. And then the last verb, support. Historically, we have seen these different kinds of uses fall under support. So pre-development work, if you have a municipal site and you're wanting to determine its feasibility and do some pre-development work to move it towards affordable housing being built on the site, that's something that CPC could potentially fund. Updating your housing plan could be something that CPA funds go towards. Rental assistance is specifically called out in the CPA statute. In fact, this is it. So originally when CPA passed, there was no definition for support. But it does say that it shall include but not be limited to programs that provide grants, loans, rent assistance, and security deposits. So these kind of programs are allowed with CPA funds, but we just need to remember the red phrase, for the purpose of making housing affordable. So it's not about social services, it's really about helping people access the housing that they need, making housing affordable for our families and our individuals. So to kind of wrap up, when Norwood is moving forward, thinking about how you will support more affordable housing in the community, I would just suggest that you consider the local infrastructure, the needs and the resources that already exist in your town, to develop goals that really reflect identified needs. So I would suggest that you update your needs analysis or your housing production plans, because you're really moving forward with current data. The market has gotten even worse, even tighter. And then be real about your capacity, because the Housing Trust is a volunteer board and affordable housing is complex. And then we have a lot of different resources at MHP. One is a housing toolbox, and there's a search tool on that. So this website has all kinds of information about zoning, about financing for affordable housing, a lot about affordable housing trusts. So you can even just use a search tool and put in a word or a topic or a phrase, and hopefully you'll get what you need. And then we have a site, DataTown. I do have a little bit of flyers about this, but we have a website, DataTown, and this has key data for all 351 communities in the state. So this is what Matt referred to earlier, but this is some of the kind of data that you can get off the site, and all of the data can be made into JPEG images that you can use freely in Norwood. You can put it in your PowerPoints. You can do it whatever you want with it. So this shows your population change. So you see that you grew a lot and then actually have decreased in population in the last 50 years and stayed pretty flat. You have a pretty good range of ages in Norwood, and so internally in our in-house on the site, we kind of refer to this kind of a makeup as age balanced. And then I decided to just compare your age distribution with a few of the surrounding communities. So this is another tool on the website. If you want to compare your community to any other community in the state with the different data points, you can do that. And so the main things that popped out to me was that Norwood and Canton have a much bigger young people population than the other two communities, but that Walpole and Westwood have a noticeably larger under 20 population. So some of this can be interesting as you're thinking about your community. And then this just gives you a glimpse of your housing stock on the bottom left. You see that your community actually has much more diversity of housing options than a lot of our communities in the greater Boston area, which is probably partly why you have more young adults. But you can see that your housing stock, the majority of it was built before 2000, and that after 2000, housing development has dropped off quite a bit in Norwood, and that's pretty typical, unfortunately. It's also why we have such a severe housing crisis, because we haven't been building housing enough housing. And then this is the slide that you already saw. So it just shows you that renters on the top, severely cost burdened. You have about 18% of your renters are severely cost burdened, which means that they're paying over 50% of their gross income on rent every month. And then 22% are cost burdened. They're paying over 30% of their gross income on their rent. And homeowners there's definitely some cost burden, but not near as severe as renters. And then this is some online resources as well. And we have a training coming up in March 14th, that's specifically for Housing Trust and CPC boards and staff that support both of these. It's an all-day conference in Marlboro, and we're focusing on the affordable housing development process from the perspective of developer, lender, and communities. And I'm always available for questions, follow-up, even more information and details. Thank you.
Thank you, Shelley. Appreciate it. We have one more presenter. I know that we're running out of time. This is Sarah Bouchard. Sarah works for the town of Westwood as their housing and zoning agent, and she's going to talk a little bit about what our neighbor is doing in terms of affordable housing and what her role is in that. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Sarah Bouchard. I am the housing and zoning agent for the town of Westwood. I'm also a proud resident of Norwood, and it's a real privilege to be here with you tonight to hopefully share some of my expertise with the community that I call home. So I am, as you can tell by everything you've heard tonight, there are so many different ways for municipalities to kind of come at the affordable housing crisis. None of them are doing the same exact thing, and so I'm hoping to share a little bit about what your neighbor, Westwood, is doing to meet its affordable housing goals. So I am the housing and zoning agent. It's a full-time position in the Community and Economic Development Department. I work closely with the Planning Board. I personally support both the Housing Partnership, which is a small committee of people working solely on affordable housing issues, and also the Zoning Board. So I advise all land use and decision-making boards on affordable housing concerns. So I inform policy that the town generates relating to affordable housing, and also any specific developments that are in the works. You'll often find me lurking at select board meetings or planning board meetings, the Finance and Warrant Commission as well, to kind of comment on housing related issues and share some of the information that we've learned about what the affordable housing needs are in town. I like to try to represent Westwood in statewide advocacy efforts for affordable housing. Right now I'm currently serving as a Policy Leadership Council member for the Citizens Housing and Planning Association, which is a real honor because it allows me to learn a lot from people who are way smarter than I am in the housing field and bring that back to the community I serve, which is really great. I also manage the town's monitoring obligations, so like Veronica and a lot of Shelley's counterparts at MHP, I monitor the affordable housing that we have to make sure that they're staying on top of all of their regulatory requirements. I'm supervising lotteries to make sure that tenant selection is fairly completed. I help with the lease up for new buildings and making sure that all the paperwork is in order, and then ongoing occupancy and compliance. Perhaps most significantly, I'm also a local advocate and resource for residents or people who are hoping to become residents of Westwood. As anybody in this room who has tried to find affordable housing for themselves knows, it is super complicated. There's a lot of paperwork involved in getting an affordable housing unit. Managing deadlines for lotteries is challenging. The requirements for every program and sometimes every location are different, and it's a lot to navigate. So I try to always be available for people to walk in and call who have questions, maybe need help filling out applications, or need a resource where I can point them in the right direction to somebody who's perhaps more qualified than I am to help them with their particular need. So I do have cards. You do not have to be a resident of Westwood to contact me in my office. So if there's anybody who has any of those kinds of concerns or questions, I'd encourage you to reach out to me in my office or later this evening. So one of my major projects that I've been spending a lot of time on in the last 18 months is Westwood's Housing Production Plan. For those who are unfamiliar with these housing production plans, they're defined by the state in Chapter 40B. They're a municipality's affordable housing strategy. It includes a needs assessment with a lot of data about what the affordable housing needs are specific to that community. Who in the community needs affordable housing? Is it seniors? Is it families with children? What kind of affordable housing do they need? Is it rentals? Is it home ownership opportunities? What does it look like? Is it condos, multifamily buildings, single-family homes, townhomes? The data kind of informs the development. So having the data in a plan that's recognized by the community is your 5-year plan for how you're actually going to achieve that goal. And so your HPP also includes a strategy and lots of different ideas on how you're going to get there. Westwood's never had a housing production plan, so this was our first one, and we're a small town, smaller than Norwood. So while most municipalities contract it out, we drafted ours in-house with a lot of support from my office and the Housing Partnership. So we just submitted it to the state for review, but it was an 18-month process that included a lot of resident engagement, public hearings, approvals by the planning and select boards, and I will say I would not have been able to do any of it if it weren't for that Data Town and the support from Mass Housing Partnership's data services team. So if anybody in here is on the municipal side and hasn't looked at Data Town yet, please do. You will save yourself so much gray hair, which I did because I'm not a stats person. It was hugely helpful. So the Housing Partnership set a more aggressive goal for affordable housing in Westwood in our housing production plan. Our statutory minimum requirement for affordable housing is 10% of our total housing units. We are at our 10% now, and the Housing Partnership and the Planning and Select Boards agreed that we wanted to stay above 11%. And so that is our 5-year goal, is to stay at 11% for our affordable housing. Similarly, we want to achieve a diverse portfolio of affordable housing options and promote housing stability across the board for people at all price points and housing types that they're interested in. So promoting housing of choice is really our goal in Westwood, to make sure that whatever kind of housing individuals are looking for, that they can find something that fits their needs in town. It's a lofty goal. Housing in Westwood is expensive. Yes. Housing in Westwood is expensive, and so our plan is really to try and do the best that we can to increase those opportunities for people. I just pulled a Matt Lane. What did I do? Yeah. Poor Kate's the only one. So the group that helped with the housing production plan is the Housing Partnership. So I can talk a little bit about that group. The Housing Partnership and Fair Housing Committee is an appointed committee. They're appointed by the Select Board. We currently have 8 members, including ex officio members, meaning staff people like myself who don't necessarily have a vote but participate in all of the committee meetings, and alternates. We have representation from the Planning and Select Boards on this group. I would say, with the exception of the Housing Production Plan, which has consumed a lot of our time and our energy over the last 18 months, probably our most important order of business that we deal with regularly is the review and management of affordable housing proposals that come in through our inclusionary zoning. What's inclusionary zoning? Inclusionary zoning is when your zoning bylaw requires that a certain percentage of any new housing development include some affordable units. Sometimes it's hard units, sometimes it's payments. Different bylaws in different towns can require it to look differently in different forms. Westwood's is not prescriptive. It doesn't say anything specifically about whether it's going to be rental or ownership units, whether the affordable that's constructed has to be a hard unit or a payment. What it does in Westwood is it allows the planning board to
review alternate proposals and determine at that point in time whether what's being proposed by the developer is in the best interest of the town at that time. So it gives a lot of discretion to the planning board, and so the housing partnership and the housing authority are both included in the bylaw. The bylaw requires the planning board to receive comment from both of those groups as it makes that really important determination. So the housing partnership takes that responsibility very seriously. The bylaw requires that 15% of developments with housing units over 8 units, 15% of those have to be affordable. The housing partnership takes that responsibility very seriously and reviews those requirements and thinking about what the needs of the community are at that time and if what the developer is proposing really meets those needs. And as you can imagine, the housing production plan is a really useful tool for any group when it's trying to determine what is that need and does this proposal meet that need. I would say inclusionary zoning is probably the most effective tool that Westwood has had to meet its affordable housing goals. And the housing partnership is really active in making that happen. Beyond that, the housing partnership really works to set my agenda as a full-time housing advocate for the town. They give me inspiration and ideas for the kinds of educational campaigns they'd like to see the town doing, what kinds of things about affordable housing that they think that people in Westwood need to know about. They give me ideas for research into various programs that they'd like to see expanded or grant initiatives that they'd like the town to pursue. So they really do a lot of work to help set my agenda, which I appreciate. They also serve as a review, a hearing and monitoring entity for fair housing complaints for the sale and rent of affordable properties in town. And so a little word on fair housing. To anybody in the room who may be in the process of searching for affordable housing, if you're kind of on the market for a new place, it's important, just as a reminder, that state and federal laws protect the rights of people to access housing free of discrimination on any of these protected classes. So if you feel that you've been denied a housing opportunity or additional barriers have been put in place by somebody making it harder for you to access a housing opportunity on the basis of your race, a disability, your sex, your sexual orientation, your familial status, that you have kids, perhaps that you have a Section 8 voucher, your source of income, all of these are protected classes. And if you feel that this has happened to you, you have certain rights that I'd encourage you to learn more about. The Mass Commission Against Discrimination takes those complaints. The Attorney General's Office will listen to you and talk you through it. Legal aid bureaus are a great resource, or you can even call somebody like me who can point you to those very smart people to help you resolve those complaints. But the Fair Housing Committee and Housing Partnership in Westwood is concerned about these issues, and so we do a lot of educational campaigns. And I often will receive calls and do my best to try to help with some dispute resolution in towns where instances where that may come up. So that's a big component for fair housing that I think it's important to mention to anybody who's looking. So education is a big component that I personally like to work on more in fair housing in the next 5 years. It's written into our housing production plan. I think it's really important to provide that education to both renters and homeowners, but also to people on the other side of that transaction, right? To lenders, to real estate agents, to landlords, to make sure that people know what their rights and obligations are under the Fair Housing Act, both the state and the federal level. So my work is comprehensive. I'm the housing person for a small town, so it means I'm wearing a lot of hats. I'll often be switching gears to monitoring compliance, to outreach, to advocacy, working with individual families and people in need of housing. So I'm always switching gears, but it's a real privilege to serve the community in that way. And I enjoy it. I am proud to be able to share some of this with Norwood. I'm really proud to call Norwood my home, and the more opportunities that people have to be able to do the same, I think, is a good thing. So with that, I'll turn this over to Matt for questions and answers.
Okay, thank you everybody for staying. This is a lot of information. I think you can see that it's a really complicated issue. We're happy to stick around for a little bit if we can, just to take some questions. I'm not saying that every question will be answered. We don't know. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that we have a few people here that are involved with the town. Paul Halkiotis is our town planner. Tom Maloney, Bill Plasko, Stephen Merritt. Stephen and Bill are on the Norwood Housing Authority, and Bill is also a selectman, and Tom Maloney. I'm so glad that they're here because I think this shows it's a really important issue. I think the easiest thing is to raise your hand. I'll run over to you, and then one of the smarter people here will answer, hopefully. Okay.
I can just yell it out.
I like the yelling.
Okay. Shelley, I'm a newbie to anything about housing, so can you give us the numbers for Norwood, what our stock is, that kind of thing from your numbers?
So I can't, I'm sorry. Do you mean you're affordable, you're on the
Yes,
subsidized
yeah,
housing?
just where, I mean, just any broad brush of where Norwood stands and.
Paul, I saw your hand kind of do this.
So,
I can answer that question. Norwood has 9.98% of its housing stock as affordable. The state law.
I should know the best way to get it over. I was wondering.
Norwood has 9.98% of its housing as affordable. The statute, Chapter 40B, actually has two goal thresholds that communities should work towards. There's the 10%, and then there is a alternative, and that's 1.5% of the town's land area being dedicated towards affordable housing. And the town of Norwood has achieved that 1.5% that you might have heard about in the news a few years ago. So we have reached our affordable housing technical goals according to the state's requirements. However, the town of Norwood isn't done and shouldn't be done.
And of that 10%, what's for buying and renting?
Home ownership versus rental?
Yeah, I think there's only 10 home ownership units out of the whole stock. So not a lot.
And with Chapter 40B, when it's rental, all of the units count on the subsidized housing inventory, even though only 25% are affordable. So just keep that in mind, that the 10% is only, like you said, a baseline. It's not a reflection of the need, it's just a baseline.
Right, that's kind of tricky too to figure out, Shelley, that's a good point. So the new, the Regal lots, that's 40 units. Only 10 of them are affordable, but all 40 count towards the town's subsidized housing inventory. Yeah.
I just have a question. Who decides what the affordable, I mean, when you mentioned those Regal Press rents, doesn't it seems like they should be more like 800, 900, 1,200 for the one bedroom.
Yeah, they should
Who
be.
sets these rates as affordable?
so the challenge is that the traditional 40B developments are where the market rate are subsidizing the affordable. It means that the affordable are generally set at 80% of the area median income, and that's the area median income. So it's including all of affluent communities around us that really increase what that is. And that's just the way that it is. So why low-income housing tax credits, LIHTC, goes to 60% and 30% is to help reach the deeper affordability. But whereas 80% can be subsidized by market rate, to do deeper affordability, then we need public subsidy to do that. And that's really limited on the federal and state level, and there's a lot of competition for it. So that's the challenge of.
You ask who sets the rent.
The state.
Oh, HUD, the federal, HUD does.
HUD.
HUD. The federal government does.
So
Yeah, so we
you're
use, we
saying
all use HUD numbers.
that's set by.
That's typical with housing
an
programs.
average of an area.
Yeah.
You'd have to go out to like a rural area to get rents that are truly affordable.
So the median income would be less, but it's why we have to do deeper affordability as well to reach.
Stephen, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, I just need to correct. HUD doesn't set the rent. HUD sets the fair market rent for the area. HUD compiles the income stats.
Sorry, yeah.
The rents are set by 40B. The regulations are 40B, and that goes to 80%.
But they rely on HUD data.
They rely on HUD data,
To
but HUD
create
doesn't
those.
set it. So while the question is here, I only saw one town who addresses the need, that you talked about low-income housing credit. Every developer comes in at the 80%.
Yes.
They don't have to, but they all do. And that window of affordability is somewhere between 72 and 80. Because below 72, you can't get a mortgage to pay the thing. So it's kind of, that needs to be up there. It's affordable is real narrow. There's a real narrow band of affordability here for purchasing particularly. And the rentals, that's a whole different story because it's all income and it's gonna be, checked every year, like we do with public housing, so. I don't know what MHP is looking to do to address that other than tax credits. Because it's really putting pressure on developers to develop more economic models. And that hasn't happened.
So it's not quite that simple. It's extremely expensive to build housing, and so the costs are really high. And in order to get financing for it, then you have to have certain operating income for a development. So it's really complex, and it comes down to the cost. So if you're going to do it where it's a traditional 40B, where the market rate are supposed to subsidize the affordable, then those are all going to be priced at 80% of the area at median income. They could do 20% of the units at, I think it's 50% of the area median income. In a lot of communities, because of the cost of land and et cetera, that's even hard to do without public subsidy. If we want deeper affordability, then that does take more public subsidy. It's going to take more CPA funds, like low-income housing tax credits, and other resources to get the 50 and 30% of the area median income, to get housing priced that low. Are you on it?
On the Avalon condos, are they condos?
So, just,
Okay, how many are low income there?
so that, yeah, that's not Shelley's world, but if someone could answer that with the state.
They're zero or low income.
Right, because
Zero
remember
or low
that,
income. They're
right.
affordable, zero or low.
80%.
Right, so that was, I don't know if you saw that slide earlier, but that threshold is the 80% of the area median income is affordable. There are affordable units, right. Of the whole development, right. 80%.
So Mary's asking the difference between low income and affordable. I think like we said, affordable is sort of the terminology used for 80% of the area median income. So for Norwood, we were saying, I think that was around, for a one-bedroom unit, $61,000. Right about there.
So generally, low income and affordable actually is oftentimes both 80%, and then very low income is 50% of the area at median income, and extremely low income is 30% of the area at median income. That tends to be HUD language, but it can depend based on the context, just that people are defining things a little bit differently. But for the subsidized housing inventory, it has to be affordable at 80% of the area median income or lower. With the Community Preservation Act, it can go up to 100% of the area at median income.
You know, so you're saying 100% or 80% of the area median income, but to make it to be affordable, it's what, under 30% of that income?
I mean, it depends on what you're thinking of specifically.
Obviously, it's all arbitrary, so that gets to the point that I was trying to understand. First question I have is, could you raise your hand if you were under the impression? Well,
That's not what this is. That's not what this is. It's okay to have questions.
Wait,
No.
Hold on, you're saying that's not what it is. I'm asking a question. Could you raise your hand?
No, you're not. You're.
I can't.
It's not that type of forum. It's not that type of forum. I appreciate
What
you
kind
have
of forum is this then? That's the question I'm asking. That's the question that I'm asking. What kind of a forum?
We're trying to get information to
Whole-
people
right.
about affordable housing. That's it.
Okay, so
That's
what-
why people from Norwood aren't necessarily talking about it. We have people from the state talking about it, because it's a
So
sensitive
what I'm
subject.
asking is this. Is the point of this meeting to try to help people get houses, or is it to help them become involved in some kind of
It's
affordable?
advocacy. It's advocacy.
This is advocacy.
Right. But there are resources. If you're looking for information, as some of the speakers said, we want you to reach out to them.
Oh, right, okay.
Okay.
So, so I don't understand why you have an issue with me asking people what they're here for.
That's not what
I'm asking, I'm talking to him because.
Does anyone have any other questions?
This is my show, so you need to listen.
Hey.
It's kind of
Veronica, you're probably pretty good at bringing it home, I bet.
Well, maybe. So just really quickly, you all heard a lot of different terminology, and I do apologize for those of us that are in the industry. We do use a lot of acronyms. So feel free to just ask us to repeat for you. If you want to come up and talk with us, we will be glad to tell you what is LIHTC, what does 40B really mean, or when you hear CHAPA and when you hear MHP, what does all of that look like? What does all of that mean? And monitoring it. So ask us the question. But I want to just make sure, for those of you who did come in asking and thinking about where do you find affordable rental units, we're broken down into regions, right? And so the region that actually handles Norwood is actually called SMOC, Southeastern Middlesex Opportunity Council. And so if anybody, or like the gentleman or anyone else in here is looking for affordable rental, subsidized housing, they also have a program called RAFT. This is good resources because maybe somebody may also need this. And RAFT gives up to $4,000 for first, last, and security. But they also help you find affordable rental. And so if you can't find it with us here in Norwood, SMOC is the agency that you would reach out to, and they are in Framingham. And they are our resource to this town.
So that just to kind of help feed that.
Thank you guys, I really appreciate you coming.
Where will be the link to go back and look at these slides?
Really good question. What's the best way to get all the information that was presented tonight to the group?